had never imagined that a quiet life in the wheat-swept plains of Kansas would prepare her for war. She had grown up running barefoot through golden fields, chasing the wind and listening to the distant hum of trains that carried strangers to unknown places. Her father, a retired mechanic, had taught her to fix engines, and her mother, a nurse, had taught her that courage was often silent and uncelebrated. Both lessons would serve her in ways could never have imagined. At 25, had volunteered as a military ambulance driver, not because she wanted to fight, not because she sought glory, but because she wanted to save lives. She had seen too many friends and relatives suffer in small-town accidents, and the thought of carrying hope on wheels, racing against time to pull people from the jaws of death, had seemed like the right kind of heroism. In her mind, heroism wasn't about striking an enemy. It was about refusing to let the wounded die. Ambulance, a battered olive-green vehicle nicknamed Hope by the soldiers, rattled down the dirt roads near the forward base. Its engine groaned and the tires kicked up clouds of dust that caught in her dark hair. Inside, medical kits were stacked neatly, bandages and morphine syringes arranged with the precision of a surgeon. Ran her gloved hands over the dashboard, checking gauges and switches, each action a ritual she had performed hundreds of times. She knew that a small oversight could mean a life lost. Round her the base hummed with a tense energy. Soldiers ran in all directions, shouting orders, loading supplies, and checking their weapons. The air smelled of diesel, gun oil, and dust, a strange mixture that had become familiar. Radio chatter crackled with reports of enemy movements. Possible sighting near the canyon pass, a voice announced. Stomach tightened. She had driven the canyon route dozens of times. It was narrow, winding, and flanked by steep cliffs. Any ambush there would leave little room for escape. Despite the anxiety, maintained her calm. Her uniform bore the stains of countless missions, blood, mud, soot, but her eyes were sharp and alert. Fellow soldiers admired her composure, though few truly understood it. She was quiet, never seeking praise, and that humility only her presence. Lieutenant, a tall, wiry officer who had been in the field longer than anyone could count, had once said, "You have a fire in you that no one else can touch. You just carry it differently." She had smiled at the comment but said nothing, her focus always on the next patient, the next mission. That morning, prepared to transport a small group of injured soldiers from the field hospital to the main base. The men were mostly young, barely older than teenagers with faces pale from blood loss and fear. Some whispered to themselves, gripping bandages or gasping in pain, offered quiet words, a gentle hand on a shoulder, a reassuring smile. "We'll get you through this," she said. Her voice, calm and unwavering, seemed to carry more comfort than the medical supplies themselves. She loaded the first patient. She noticed Private Daniels, a fresh recruit with wide, haunted eyes. "You're not scared?" he asked in a whisper, clutching his arm, paused, glancing at him. She remembered herself 6 months ago, her own first assignment, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down like a storm. "No," she said finally, "I'm just focused. That's enough for now." She hoisted him onto the stretcher and secured him carefully. Fear existed, she knew, but it was secondary to the task. Courage, she thought, was the discipline to act despite fear. The convoy set off, engines growling, tires crunching against the rocky terrain. Hands gripped the wheel tightly, eyes scanning every curve. Smoke from distant fires drifted across the horizon, a grim reminder of the conflict that had consumed the region. Soldiers riding alongside her muttered jokes and tried to keep spirits light, but noticed the tension behind their smiles. She understood. It wasn't just the enemy that could strike unexpectedly. Accidents, misjudgments, and even the terrain could be equally lethal. As they entered the canyon, a narrow ribbon of dust and rock, the convoy slowed. Senses sharpened. She could hear the faint echoes of movement above the cliffs, the clatter of loose stones rolling down slopes. The canyon walls, towering and jagged, created shadows that danced like specters. She adjusted her mirror, noting every detail, the location of medics, the spacing of vehicles, the alignment of supplies. Every decision mattered, every second counted. Suddenly, the radio crackled. "Enemy sighting confirmed. Proceed with extreme caution." The words cut through the air like a knife. Jaw tightened. She had driven in dangerous situations before, but the threat now felt immediate, tangible. The soldiers behind her murmured nervously, met their eyes briefly, giving a nod that was firm, grounding. She didn't speak of fear, she spoke of purpose. They followed her lead, silently trusting that the quiet driver could guide them through the peril. She inhaled deeply, hands steady, eyes scanning every cliff and shadow. Her mind raced with contingency plans. If ambushed, she would block the convoy's retreat with her vehicle, provide cover, and assist the wounded. If trapped, she would locate the safest escape route, even if it meant risking herself. These were calculations she had run in her head countless times, though she hoped never to execute them. Still, she knew that preparation was half the battle. Courage was only meaningful when paired with readiness. The first curve of the canyon revealed nothing but dust and silence. Exhaled slightly, a small measure of relief, though it was brief. Somewhere ahead, danger waited, invisible but present. She tightened her grip, eyes forward, muscles coiled like springs. This mission, routine as it seemed, could change everything. Had a feeling she was on the edge of a moment that would define her, not just as a driver, not just as a medic, but as someone who might have to do the unthinkable. As the convoy wound deeper into the canyon, felt the familiar pulse of fear mixed with resolve. Her thoughts drifted to home, the quiet Kansas sunsets, the scent of fresh bread from her mother's kitchen, the laughter of children in the fields. She clung to these images, not as escape, but as reminders of why she had chosen this path. Every life she saved brought her closer to preserving that innocence in others. She was ready to face whatever came, even if it meant stepping into a world she had never wanted to enter. His eyes narrowed as she spotted movement in the shadows, subtle but undeniable. Rocks shifted, a whisper of motion against the canyon walls. Her heart skipped a beat, and yet she remained composed. "Hold steady," she murmured to herself, more a command than a thought. The convoy followed her lead, unaware of the exact danger lurking. His pulse surged, every nerve felt alive. She knew this was the moment where ordinary courage would meet extraordinary demand. And then from the cliff above, the first bullet struck, a violent, shattering explosion of sound. Ambulance jolted, metal groaning as debris rained down. Screams erupted behind her, mingling with the roar of engines. The canyon that had seemed so controlled, so navigable, transformed into chaos. Gritted her teeth, adrenaline flooding her veins. She had driven through danger before, but this was different. The world she knew, the world where she only delivered aid, was about to vanish. In that instant, realized that saving lives might require more than steady hands and a compassionate heart. It might demand something darker, sharper, and utterly unfamiliar. And though she did not yet know it, she was about to discover a strength she never imagined she possessed. The canyon, which had seemed so quiet just moments ago, erupted into chaos. The first bullets tore through the air like angry hornets, splintering rock and shattering silence. His hands gripped the steering wheel of her ambulance, knuckles white beneath the gloves. Her heart pounded, but her mind remained eerily clear. Every second counted. Behind her, soldiers shouted, scrambling for cover, their voices a mixture of panic and determination. Smoke curled from the canyon floor, and dust swirled around their boots, making it nearly impossible to see the enemy. His first instinct was to protect the wounded. Private Daniels, the young recruit she had reassured earlier, screamed as a bullet grazed the side of the stretcher. Lunged toward him, pushing him down behind the ambulance's reinforced doors. The vehicle groaned under the sudden jolt of explosions. She ducked instinctively, feeling the reverberations through her chest. Around her, chaos unfolded like a storm. Soldiers were being thrown off balance, shouts mixed with cries of pain, and the echo of gunfire bounced eerily off the canyon walls. Her training kicked in, scanned the terrain quickly, noting the safest paths to maneuver the ambulance. Every twist of the wheel, every press of the brake had consequences. She could hear rocks tumbling from above, enemy scouts taking advantage of the high ground. Eyes darted back and forth, calculating escape routes while shielding the wounded inside. Sweat dripped down her forehead, mixing with the dust and grime, but she ignored it. Fear was irrelevant now. Survival and protection were all that mattered. "Move, get the stretcher in," she shouted to a medic trying to stabilize another soldier. Her voice cut through the noise with unexpected authority. The medic obeyed, diving toward the ambulance as another round of bullets tore through the canyon floor. Kept the vehicle moving, swerving to avoid debris, her tires scraping against loose stones. Sparks flew from the underside, and she felt the vibrations of near misses. She knew the next few minutes could decide who lived and who died. Every motion, every decision was critical. From the cliff above, shadows moved with deadly intent. Caught sight of a sniper's glint, a metallic reflection from the sun. She swerved slightly, narrowly avoiding another hail of bullets. The young soldiers in her convoy shouted, scrambling for cover, but many were pinned down. Stomach churned, and yet her mind remained razor-sharp. She remembered her father's words about mechanics and precision. Control what you can and survive the rest. Now, those lessons applied not to engines but to life itself. Private Daniels whimpered, gripping his arm and trembling. I can't move," he said, leaned down through the half-open door. "Yes, you can, you have to. I'll help you, but you need to trust me," she said, her tone firm but gentle. She pulled him toward the door, shielding him with her body as another round struck the side of the ambulance, splintering wood and metal. For a brief second she felt a pang of fear, not for herself, but for the young lives she had sworn to protect. A soldier near the front of the convoy had fallen. Eyes tracked him as he struggled to crawl behind cover. She knew that if she didn't act, he would be lost. With a deep breath, she slammed the accelerator, moving the ambulance toward the fallen man. Dust, smoke, and gunfire obscured her view, but relied on instinct. She opened the door just enough to grab him, her fingers digging into his uniform. Another explosion shook the ground, sending debris raining over them, but she managed to pull him inside. Her actions did not go unnoticed. Soldiers in the canyon watched in astonishment as the ambulance driver became the shield for their comrades, realized in that moment that her role had changed. She was no longer just a driver or a medic. She was a protector in the truest sense, a guardian who would do whatever it took to keep the wounded alive. Yet even as she thought this, a part of her recoiled at the thought of what might come next. The canyon was alive with danger, and her usual tools, medicine, compassion, and driving skill, might no longer be enough. The sound of approaching enemy reinforcements echoed from above. Her heart raced, but her body responded with automatic precision. She had to keep moving. She steered the ambulance in tight turns, creating obstacles and cover for the soldiers, even as bullets tore through the vehicle's sides. Her mind calculated angles, trajectories, and potential escape routes in split seconds. Each choice could save a life or cost one. The weight of responsibility pressed down like a mountain, but she refused to let it crush her. Then the first enemy soldier appeared in her path, emerging from behind a rocky outcrop. Froze for a split second, then instinctively ducked and accelerated, avoiding his line of fire. Her pulse pounded, adrenaline coursing through every vein. She realized with a jolt that she could not rely solely on avoidance. She would have to fight back if she wanted to survive and protect the wounded. Her hands hovered near the first weapon she had seen that day, a rifle abandoned by a fallen comrade. Fear threatened to paralyze her, but determination surged stronger. As prepared to make the next maneuver, a nearby soldier shouted, "They're flanking us! Take cover!" Chaos, dust and smoke created a thick haze, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. His ears rang from explosions, her arms ached from holding the steering wheel, and sweat blinded her vision. And yet, in the midst of this storm, her mind remained focused. She remembered the soldiers she had saved in training exercises, the techniques her instructors had drilled into her. Now the lessons were real, the stakes higher than ever. Suddenly, a grenade exploded near the rear of the convoy. The shockwave knocked against the steering wheel, and she tasted dust and metal in her mouth. Her vision blurred momentarily, but she forced herself to stay upright. The wounded inside groaned, and she murmured words of reassurance, though her own voice shook. Understood the canyon was a crucible. Every decision, every movement, could tip the balance between survival and death, and she had no intention of letting it tip against them. Finally, she spotted a momentary lull in the gunfire. Took a deep breath, her body coiled like a spring. She could see an opening, a narrow stretch of canyon where the terrain might give them a chance to escape. She directed the convoy toward it, shouting instructions over the roar of explosions. Soldiers followed, covering the wounded as best they could. The ambulance skidded over loose gravel, tires nearly losing grip on the uneven ground. Yet hands remained steady. She had survived so far, and she refused to falter now. As they pushed through the canyon, caught a glimpse of the enemy retreating temporarily, only to regroup behind boulders and shadows. She knew this was not the end, merely a pause in the battle. Her pulse raced, but a strange calm settled over her mind. She had faced the immediate danger, protected the wounded, and demonstrated courage she hadn't realized she possessed. Still, knew the hardest part was yet to come. Somewhere ahead, the enemy's full strength awaited. His role as a medic and driver was about to collide with a reality she had never wanted. The battlefield might demand more than her hands and her heart. It might demand that she take up arms herself. She swallowed hard, gripping the wheel, and whispered under her breath, "I can do this. I have to do this." The ambulance rumbled forward, carrying hope, fear, and survival into the heart of the canyon, where fate awaited with unforgiving precision. The canyon was a whirlwind of dust, smoke, and chaos. Ambulance, hope, rattled over jagged rocks, carrying wounded soldiers who groaned and cried, their faces pale and streaked with dirt. Her hands were raw, her uniform torn in several places, and her pulse thundered in her ears. Every second she had spent as a medic and driver had prepared her for crisis management, but nothing could have prepared her for what was coming. The enemy had regrouped. Their shadows moved like predators over the cliffs, poised to strike. Suddenly, a soldier's scream cut through the air. Glanced to the side and saw Private Daniels pinned behind a rock, his arm trapped under debris. His eyes widened in terror, and blood stained the dust beneath him. His heart lurched, but there was no time to hesitate. She braked sharply, skidding the ambulance close enough to shield him from the line of fire. Bullets ricocheted off the metal sides and shards of rock rained down, striking the vehicle with metallic clatter. A sudden jarring explosion threw forward. Pain seared her shoulder, but she ignored it, crawling toward the back to reach Daniels. She gritted her teeth, pulling him free despite the debris, his weight dragging against her strength. Around them, the air was thick with gunpowder and dust. Soldiers shouted instructions she barely heard, while others scrambled for cover. His mind worked in fast, brutal calculations. Move him to the ambulance, avoid open fire, and find a way to protect everyone else. And then she saw it, a rifle lying on the ground beside a fallen soldier. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it, the cool metal a foreign weight in her hands. Had fired guns only in training drills long ago and never under such life-or-death circumstances. Her instinct screamed at her, "This is not what you signed up for. Put it down." Yet her heart knew differently. Without a weapon, Daniels and the other wounded would have no chance. Realized with a sudden, terrifying clarity that she had to act, or everything she had fought for would be lost. Crouched behind the ambulance, rifle in hand, her knuckles white on the stock, she took a steadying breath, trying to center herself. Every movement was calculated. Her eyes darted over the canyon floor, spotting the glint of enemy rifles hidden among rocks. The enemy advanced, unaware that their target was no longer just the soldiers. They were under threat from the one person no one expected to fight back. Stomach churned with adrenaline, fear, and an odd sense of resolve. Her first shot was clumsy but necessary. She aimed, fired, and felt a recoil that jerked the rifle from her shoulder. A soldier fell, stunned, and for a moment the canyon seemed to hold its breath. His heart raced, but clarity returned. She could do this. She must do this. Each subsequent shot was steadier, her body learning quickly, instinct guiding her hands. Her mind, trained to assess situations rapidly, now adapted to combat. Calculations of survival, escape, and protection became second nature. The wounded inside the ambulance cried out, and his voice cut through the chaos. "Stay low, keep your heads down, we'll get through this." Her tone was calm, precise, unshakable, an anchor amid the storm. Even as her hands shook, she continued firing, moving the ambulance slightly to provide cover, shielding the injured from enemy fire. Each shot was deliberate, each maneuver designed to protect lives. The adrenaline surged through her veins, sharpening her focus in ways she had never known possible. Time became a blur. Minutes stretched into hours, ducked, fired, and rolled behind the ambulance repeatedly, keeping the enemy at bay. Her arm burned from gripping the rifle, and the dust in her throat made breathing difficult, yet she could not stop. Every second she hesitated, a life hung in the balance. She glanced at Daniels, his wide eyes filled with fear and awe. I didn't think, he began, but cut him off with a shake of her head. Don't think, just survive. That's all that matters right now. As the skirmish escalated, realized she was no longer merely reacting. She was taking initiative. She spotted a cluster of enemy soldiers advancing from a side path, trying to flank the convoy. Without hesitation, she aimed, fired, and forced them to retreat behind cover. A soldier watching from a nearby boulder nodded at her, surprised and relieved. Felt an unfamiliar thrill, a surge of power, yes, but more importantly, the satisfaction of defending lives with precision and courage. The ambulance, her vehicle of hope, had become a fortress of survival. Yet amidst the battle's mind remained painfully aware of her humanity. Every shot she fired, every enemy she forced back, weighed on her soul. She had not come here to kill, yet the necessity of survival had made it inevitable. The canyon echoed with the sounds of combat, the roar of gunfire, the screams of the wounded, the clash of metal and stone. Gritted her teeth and continued, knowing that hesitation would be fatal. She had entered a new reality, where saving lives required an edge she never thought she possessed. Hours, or what felt like hours, later a brief lull appeared. The enemy seemed to regroup further back in the canyon, allowing in the convoy a momentary pause. She leaned against the ambulance, rifle still in hand, breathing heavily. Her uniform was torn, sweat and blood streaked across her face, and her hands trembled uncontrollably. Yet in her chest, a fierce, unyielding pulse told her she had survived, and so had those she protected. She had crossed a line, stepping into a role she had never imagined: medic, driver, and defender. Her eyes scanned the canyon. Soldiers emerged from cover, wounded but alive, and their expressions of gratitude and awe made her heart ache. She had not sought glory, but she had earned respect. The rifle, once a foreign object, now felt like an extension of her resolve. She realized that courage was not about desire to fight, but the willingness to do whatever was necessary when lives depended on it. Had discovered a power within herself, forged in the crucible of chaos, that would shape every moment yet to come. Even as she took a moment to steady herself, knew the fight was far from over. Enemy forces remained in the canyon, and the wounded were still vulnerable. Her mission had changed irrevocably. She was no longer just the ambulance driver. She was the shield, the defender, and if needed, the weapon. Her hands, once meant for healing, were now capable of wielding destruction, but only in the service of protecting life. The weight of that responsibility pressed on her chest, but embraced it with fierce determination. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the canyon floor. Adjusted her grip on the rifle and glanced at the soldiers around her. They looked to her now not only for rescue but for leadership. Every choice, every shot, every maneuver would ripple outward, shaping the lives of everyone in that narrow corridor of survival. She drew a deep breath, feeling exhaustion and exhilaration in equal measure. The battlefield had changed her, but in the eye of the storm she had found herself, and a courage she had never known existed. And in that moment understood that her life had shifted forever. The ambulance was no longer just a vehicle, it was a lifeline. Her hands, once trained to heal, had become instruments of survival. The rifle, the canyon, the chaos, they were all part of a new reality she had to master. This journey had taken her to the edge of fear, and yet she stood resolute, ready to face whatever came next, armed with determination, skill, and a heart unbroken by the violence surrounding her. The canyon had transformed into a theater of chaos. Dust and smoke hung thick in the air, mingling with the acrid scent of gunpowder. Hands ached, her shoulders burned from holding the rifle, and yet there was no time to think of fatigue. The wounded were scattered around her, pinned behind jagged rocks, their moans blending with the roar of gunfire. Her ambulance, battered and rattling, served as both shield and fortress, protecting the lives she had sworn to save. She had crossed a line she never thought she would, and there was no turning back. His eyes scanned the canyon, calculating every movement with razor-sharp precision. Enemy soldiers had regrouped, now flanking from multiple directions. Their rifles gleamed in the sun, and their shadows danced over the jagged rocks. Fired carefully, aiming for suppression rather than elimination, keeping the enemy at bay while giving her convoy and the wounded a chance to move. Her first shots had been tentative. Now they were confident, controlled, and deadly effective. She had discovered a rhythm, an unspoken dance between life, fear, and survival. The young soldiers nearby looked to her with a mix of awe and disbelief. How is she doing this?" whispered one, glancing at as she pivoted, firing at enemies advancing from the left ridge. The question hung in the air, unanswered because Even didn't fully understand the transformation that had taken place within her. The ambulance driver, once defined by compassion and skill behind the wheel, had become a defender. Every movement, every shot, was an act of protection, a promise to those relying on her. Bullets struck the ambulance, rattling metal and splintering the wood around her. Flinched but held her position, shifting her body to absorb the shocks while keeping a steady aim. She shouted instructions to the soldiers and medics, directing them to safer positions. "Move left, cover the flank, keep them down." Her voice carried authority born from necessity, cutting through the panic and grounding those who were teetering on the edge of fear. For the first time, she realized that leadership wasn't about rank, it was about action under pressure. Her body moved instinctively, pivoting, firing, and repositioning the ambulance to provide maximum cover. Private Daniels, once trembling, now followed her lead, crouching behind a rock and returning fire. Noted his improvement with a pang of pride. She had sparked courage in others even while discovering her own. Yet with every shot her heart ached. She had not wanted to fight, had not sought to kill, but necessity had demanded it. In the calculus of survival, there were no moral luxuries. She would do whatever it took to save lives. A grenade exploded near the center of the canyon, sending shockwaves through the air. Shielded the wounded with her own body, feeling the blast rattle her bones. Dust stung her eyes and ringing filled her ears. Still, she pressed on, firing at enemy soldiers attempting to advance while simultaneously coordinating movement for the wounded. Her mind worked in split seconds, where the bullets were coming from, where her allies were, and how to maximize cover without losing ground. In that chaos, clarity emerged. She had to protect, always protect, no matter the cost. Time seemed to warp. Minutes stretched endlessly as the battle intensified. His vision blurred from sweat, dust, and exhaustion, yet she continued firing, moving, and shouting commands. The ambulance had become a fortress, a symbol of resistance. Enemy soldiers hesitated when they saw her unwavering determination, unsure how to confront someone who refused to yield. She had become the axis around which the battle pivoted, a human shield armed not only with rifle but with indomitable will. Her shoulder throbbed where a bullet had grazed her, and yet she refused to retreat. The wounded cried out, some in pain, some in fear, and moved among them like a guardian, shooting at threats while guiding them to cover. Every movement was deliberate, every decision critical. She had become a bridge between survival and annihilation, her courage a lifeline. Soldiers whispered her name, now not with disbelief but with reverent awe. "The ambulance driver, she's holding the line." Amid the chaos, noticed a soldier attempting to crawl toward the enemy, trying to flank them from behind. She yelled, warning him of unseen dangers, and fired precise rounds to suppress enemy movement. Her eyes flicked rapidly from one side to the other, processing threats, calculating trajectories, and anticipating movements. The battlefield had become a complex puzzle, and she was the center, that could decide who lived and who perished. Each shot she fired was measured, deliberate, and vital. Exhaustion weighed on her, yet adrenaline surged in tandem, sustaining her as the hours dragged on. Her body ached, her fingers cramped from gripping the rifle, and her lungs burned with exertion. But she pressed on, driven not by desire for heroism but by an unyielding commitment to life. She thought of her father's advice about mechanics: keep control over what you can. The rest is chaos. Now chaos was all around her, but her hands, her mind, and her determination were instruments of order. The enemy began to hesitate. Its relentless defense, the unflinching presence of the ambulance, and the sheer tenacity of her leadership had created uncertainty in their ranks. They had underestimated her, a mere ambulance driver, a medic, but she had become something far more formidable. She was not a soldier by training, but by necessity she had adapted to the harshest conditions of survival. And with each passing moment she reinforced the truth: courage could emerge in anyone, even the most unlikely heroes. The wounded were gradually moved to safer positions under guidance. Soldiers who had once panicked now coordinated with her, taking cues from her movements. She had turned fear into action, despair into resilience, and in the back of her mind knew this was only the beginning. The canyon was far from secure, and enemy reinforcements would likely attempt another assault. But for now, she had carved a small victory from the chaos, a temporary reprieve that owed everything to her determination. Leaned against the ambulance for a brief moment, rifle still in hand, surveying the canyon. She was battered, bruised, and exhausted beyond measure, yet an unexpected sense of clarity settled over her. She had discovered a new dimension of herself, a capacity for courage and leadership she had never imagined. Her role had changed irrevocably. No longer was she simply a driver or a medic. She was a shield, a protector, and a fighter when necessary, capable of facing danger head-on. As the sun began to dip behind the canyon walls, casting long, jagged shadows across the battlefield, allowed herself a brief, shaky exhale. The immediate danger had lessened, the wounded were protected, and the enemy had been repelled, at least for now. But the canyon had left its mark on her. She had faced fear, chaos, and death, and she had emerged not unscathed but unbroken. In that moment understood the true essence of courage. It was not about heroism in the abstract, not about medals or recognition. Courage was quiet, relentless, and practical. It was the refusal to let fear dictate action, the determination to protect life even when all else seemed lost. And as she tightened her grip on the rifle, ready for whatever came next, knew that the battlefield had changed her forever. She would survive, she would protect, and she would fight, not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. In the canyon, amid dust, blood, and smoke, had become more than an ambulance driver. She had become a force of life and resilience, holding the line when everyone else faltered, and proving that courage could take root in the most unexpected of hearts. The canyon, once an endless storm of smoke, gunfire, and chaos, gradually fell into a tense lull. His hands ached from gripping the rifle, her uniform was smeared with dust, blood, and grime, and her heart thumped with exhaustion. For hours, she had been the line between life and death for the wounded soldiers under her care, her ambulance shielding them from relentless enemy fire. Yet even in this brief pause, the tension remained, because she knew the enemy could surge again at any moment. Suddenly, the distant sound of engines and shouting cut through the canyon like a lifeline. Reinforcements had arrived. Pulse quickened, not with relief alone, but with renewed responsibility. She could not falter now, not after everything she had fought for. The soldiers, battered and bloodied, straightened as the reinforcements surged into the canyon, their presence shifting the balance of power. Enemy forces hesitated, unsure how to react to the sudden influx of troops. His heart raced, adrenaline mingling with hope. As the reinforcements spread out, firing to push the enemy back, remained behind the ambulance, rifle in hand, ensuring that the wounded were safely covered. Each shot she fired was precise, measured, and essential. Soldiers glanced at her in disbelief, whispering among themselves. "She's still holding them off, she's a miracle," one muttered. His ears caught the words, but she ignored them, focusing instead on the task at hand. She had not sought recognition, only survival for those in her care. The wounded were slowly evacuated under his guidance. She crouched beside each one, offering words of reassurance and giving instructions to the medics assisting them. Private Daniels, who had once trembled with fear, now moved with purpose, carrying supplies and helping the injured to safety. His heart swelled with a mixture of pride and sorrow. She had saved lives, yes, but not all of them. Faces of soldiers lost in the chaos flashed through her mind, and guilt gnawed at her despite the victory. Her arm throbbed where she had been grazed by a bullet, and her lungs burned with exertion but refused to let fatigue slow her down. She moved with purpose, directing traffic, ensuring no one was left behind. The ambulance, battered and had become more than a vehicle, it was a symbol of survival, a moving fortress that had carried hope through the storm. Realized that she had transformed, not just in the eyes of the soldiers, but within herself. The commanding officer of the reinforcements, a stern man with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much war, approached. He observed, rifle still in hand, standing resolute amid the chaos. "You held the line," he said, disbelief evident in his voice. Shook her head, lowering the weapon but keeping her stance firm. "I did what I had to," she replied quietly. There was no pride in her tone, only a weary acknowledgement of the role necessity had forced upon her. Soldiers gathered around, some whispering words of admiration, others simply staring. His quiet courage had become legend in the span of a few hours. She had gone from a medic and driver to a defender who had faced the canyon alone when survival demanded it. And yet, even as praise surrounded her, she felt a deep, gnawing sorrow. Lives had been lost, screams had echoed in her mind, and the canyon had claimed its price. Recognition could not erase the memories or the weight of what she had witnessed. The medics carefully lifted the most seriously wounded soldiers into stretchers, placing them into the reinforced ambulance. Remained close, monitoring their condition, offering a steady hand where necessary. Her dual role as medic and fighter had never felt so intertwined. She had learned that courage was not merely an individual attribute, it could inspire others, turn panic into action, and create order from chaos. Had become both symbol and anchor in the storm, and she understood the immense responsibility that came with it. Hours later, when the immediate threat had subsided, finally allowed herself a moment of stillness. She leaned against the ambulance, her rifle at her side, breathing heavily. Soldiers approached cautiously, their expressions a mix of gratitude and astonishment. Lieutenant, who had been her mentor since the beginning, knelt beside her, his voice low but filled with emotion. "You saved lives today that no one else could have. You held the line when everyone else faltered," shook her head. "I didn't do it alone. They fought too, I just did what I had to." But even as she spoke, felt the truth settle in her chest. She had indeed crossed a line, stepping into a realm of courage and survival that few could understand. The ambulance had been her shield, the rifle her reluctant weapon, and her resolve the force that had held chaos at bay. She looked around at the soldiers she had protected, at the survivors huddled among the rocks, and a complex wave of emotions swept over her. Relief, pride, guilt, and exhaustion, all tangled together. The reinforcements began clearing the canyon, securing the area and tending to the wounded. Assisted where she could, moving stretchers, giving instructions, and ensuring no one was left behind. She had become a leader in action, not by rank but by necessity. The soldiers whispered her name, now not in disbelief but in reverence. The ambulance driver who fought like a soldier who kept us alive. Allowed herself a brief smile, though it was tempered by the memories of those who had not survived. As the sun dipped lower behind the canyon walls, his mind replayed the day's events. She remembered the bullets, the screams, the weight of the rifle in her hands, and the terrified faces of those she had protected. She realized that heroism was not about recognition. It was about action, about doing what was necessary even when fear threatened to paralyze. Had learned a fundamental truth. Courage was practical, relentless, and sometimes uncomfortable. Despite the chaos, she felt a small measure of peace. The immediate danger had passed, the wounded were safe, and the enemy had retreated, at least for now. Hands shook from adrenaline and exhaustion, and her uniform was tattered, but she remained standing. She had faced fear, chaos, and death, and she had emerged not unscathed but unbroken. The soldiers she had saved were a testament to her courage, and she understood that her actions had altered the course of that battle. Yet even in the midst of triumph felt the weight of the canyon's toll. Faces of fallen soldiers haunted her thoughts, their absence a silent reminder of the cost of survival. She could not erase the screams, the blood, or the fear, but she could honor those lives by continuing to protect the living. This journey had changed forever. She was no longer just an ambulance driver. She had become a guardian, a fighter, and a symbol of resilience in the harshest of circumstances. As night fell over the canyon, finally allowed herself a moment of rest. She sat on the edge of the ambulance, rifle across her lap, and closed her eyes. Exhaustion pressed down on her body, but her mind remained alert, ever aware of the lingering dangers. She had survived the unthinkable, protected lives, and faced a transformation that none could have anticipated. In the quiet of the night, reflected on what she had learned. Courage was not born from desire or ambition. It was forged in necessity, in the heart of chaos, and in the unyielding commitment to protect others. When the medics and reinforcements finally secured the canyon, stood and helped direct the last of the wounded into safety, soldiers whispered words of gratitude, nodding in respect, while Lieutenant clapped her shoulder firmly. "Today, you showed everyone what true courage looks like," he said. Nodded silently, not because she sought praise, but because she understood the truth. Courage was a responsibility, a force that demanded action when all else seemed lost, and she had risen to meet it. As the canyon grew quiet and the first stars appeared above the rugged cliffs, looked at her ambulance, her rifle, and the soldiers around her, she realized that the day's events had changed her irrevocably. She had faced chaos, embraced fear, and emerged as a protector in ways she had never imagined. Once a simple medic and driver, had become a force of resilience, courage, and hope, a shield for those who could not defend themselves. The journey back to the base was surreal. The canyon, once a raging battlefield of dust, gunfire, and screams, now lay in a deceptive calm. Its ambulance rattled over rocks and uneven terrain, carrying the wounded who had survived, their pale faces marked with exhaustion, pain, and relief. The vehicle, Hope, bore the scars of the day: scratched metal, dented doors, and a shattered side panel, but it still carried the living, a testament to her determination. Sat behind the wheel, hands gripping the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the road, yet her mind was far away. For the first time since the ambush, allowed herself to reflect. The adrenaline that had sustained her throughout the battle was fading, leaving her body heavy and her mind racing with memories. The screams, the blood, the terror, all of it replayed in sharp, relentless detail. Faces of fallen soldiers haunted her thoughts, their absence a gnawing ache she could not shake. She had saved lives, yes, but the cost of survival weighed on her heart like a stone. She realized that courage carried consequences beyond the battlefield. It lingered in the quiet moments, in the memories that refused to fade. Private Daniel, sitting beside her, broke the silence. I didn't think anyone could do what you just did," he said, his voice trembling. Glanced at him, her expression weary but calm. "You don't get to think about it," she replied quietly. "You do what you have to or you lose, that's all there is." Her words, simple yet profound, carried the weight of experience. Daniels nodded, gripping his arm where a bandage wrapped his injury, and she felt a flicker of pride. She had sparked courage in others, even as she discovered it within herself. The return to base was a tense journey. Every creak of the ambulance, every shadow across the desert, reminded that danger had not vanished, it had only shifted. The enemy might strike again, or another threat could emerge at any moment. Yet she could not remain in perpetual motion. She had to confront the aftermath, the reality that her life had changed irrevocably. Her role had shifted from medic and driver to a defender, a fighter, and a symbol of hope for those she protected. It was a transformation she neither sought nor fully understood. As the base came into view, felt the weight of eyes upon her. Soldiers and medics had gathered, their faces etched with relief, awe, and gratitude. The wounded were carefully unloaded and taken to the field hospital, each one receiving attention, care, and reassurance. Followed, ensuring no one was left behind, guiding medics and offering brief words of comfort. Her hands were steady, but her chest ached with exhaustion and the unspoken grief of lives lost. The battlefield had tested her in ways she had never imagined, and now the echoes of that trial followed her like shadows. Lieutenant approached, his expression serious yet tinged with admiration. "The reports don't do justice to what you accomplished today," he said. shook her head, lowering her gaze. "I didn't do it for reports," she replied softly. "I did what I had to, that's all." Her humility was genuine, yet she felt a flicker of unease. Recognition had never been her goal, but she sensed the stirrings of something larger, a realization that her actions had forever altered how others perceived her, and how she perceived herself. The medics began tending to some minor injuries, scrapes, bruises, and the grazed shoulder that had burned throughout the canyon fight. She allowed them to clean and bandage her wounds, though her mind wandered. She thought of the rifle in her hands, the moments of pure instinct and fear, and the choices she had made. Each shot, each maneuver, had been a step into a reality she had never chosen but could not escape. Understood that her life had irrevocably changed. She was no longer simply a healer. She was a defender, a force capable of both saving and protecting, even through violence. As night fell over the base, found a quiet corner to sit and reflect. The stars shimmered above the desert horizon, a stark contrast to the chaos she had just endured. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her body, but her mind remained restless. She recalled the faces of the soldiers she had saved, the screams of those she could not, and the moment when she first gripped the rifle. Fear had been a constant companion, but so had determination. She realized that courage was not an abstract concept. It was practical, relentless, and often painful. Memories of the fallen haunted her. She remembered the young soldier who had tried to flank the enemy and the medic who had been caught in the open. Their absence was a stark reminder that survival was never guaranteed, and that heroism carried consequences beyond recognition. Felt a deep ache in her chest, a mixture of grief and guilt, but also a flicker of resolve. She had survived, she had protected others, and she had discovered a capacity for courage she had never known existed. Lieutenant approached once more, this time with a different tone, gentler, almost paternal. "You've changed today, not just in skill, but in who you are. You've seen fear, faced it, and yet you stood firm. That's not something many can do," nodded slowly, her eyes distant. "I didn't feel like a hero," she admitted quietly. "I felt responsible and scared, but responsibility doesn't come with choice, it comes with action." Her words, though soft, resonated with truth. Courage was not glamorous, it was necessity. Sleep finally found that night, though it was fragmented and uneasy. Dreams of the canyon, of gunfire and blood, mingled with fleeting images of home, the golden Kansas plains, the laughter of children, and the quiet serenity she had once known. She awoke multiple times, reaching instinctively for the rifle she no longer needed at that moment, only to remember the reality of the base. Safety, for now, but vigilance always. Understood that the emotional scars of battle were as real as the physical ones, and that processing them would be a challenge unlike any she had faced in the canyon. The next morning rose with a new awareness of herself. Her body ached, but her mind was clearer. She reflected on the events of the previous day, the ambush, the rifle in her hands, the decisions that had saved lives. She realized that she had been thrust into a role she had never sought, yet she had excelled because necessity had revealed a strength within her. Identity had shifted. She was no longer only a medic or driver, she was a protector, a leader, and a survivor. As the base returned to routine, continued her duties, assisting medics, checking supplies, and ensuring the wounded were comfortable. Yet beneath the surface, a transformation had taken root. She now understood that courage was not a choice but a response to circumstance. She had confronted fear directly, acted decisively, and saved lives in ways she had never imagined. Knew that she would carry this experience with her forever, shaping how she approached danger, responsibility, and life itself. By nightfall, walked to the edge of the base, looking out over the desert horizon. The canyon, now miles away, lingered in her thoughts like a scar etched into memory. She thought of the soldiers she had saved, the moments of terror, and the decisions that had defined her. Her hands, once trained only to heal, had wielded a rifle when necessary. Her mind, once focused solely on logistics and medical care, had calculated life-and-death decisions with precision. And her heart, though battered, had proven resilient beyond measure. Realized that the battlefield had changed her irrevocably. She could not unsee the violence, the screams, or unfeel the weight of responsibility. Yet she had also discovered a profound truth. Courage could emerge in anyone, and necessity could reveal strengths hidden even from oneself. She had faced the unthinkable and survived, not unscathed, but unbroken. Once an ambulance driver and medic had become something more, a force of resilience, protection, and hope. And though the memories would linger, the fear would return in quiet moments, and the emotional weight would persist, understood that she had emerged stronger, wiser, and prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. She had discovered the unspoken power within herself, the ability to confront danger, protect life, and act decisively when all else seemed lost. In the stillness of the desert night, vowed to honor the lives she had saved, the lessons she had learned, and the courage she had discovered within herself. The base was alive with the hum of activity, yet felt a quiet tension in her chest. Days after the ambush, the adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a weight she couldn't shake. The canyon and its chaos were no longer just memories. They were a lesson etched into her very bones. Walked through the compound, her uniform still marked by dust and blood, observing the soldiers training, medics tending to their duties, and commanders planning the next mission. She had been thrust into a new reality, one in which courage and action were inseparable. Lieutenant approached her, his eyes betraying both urgency and respect. "We have a mission," he said, handing her a set of orders. Her brow furrowed as she read. Another convoy needed escort through a volatile region where enemy forces had been spotted. The previous ambush had left scars on everyone, but this mission was critical. More lives depended on them reaching their destination safely. Fingers tightened around the edges of the paper. This wasn't a simple drive. It was a test of everything she had learned, a challenge that would demand not only skill but courage. The convoy assembled at dawn, climbed into the driver's seat of the ambulance, its familiar hum a strange comfort. Soldiers loaded supplies, medics checked stretchers, and the wounded, those able to travel, were stabilized for transport. Hands gripped the steering wheel, her mind focused. She could feel the dual weight of responsibility and anticipation. This mission was not merely a test of skill, it was a test of identity. She was no longer just a driver or medic. She was a protector, a fighter when necessary, and a leader in the heat of chaos. The road ahead was treacherous. Dusty plains gave way to rocky paths, narrow bridges, and areas of potential ambush. Eyes scanned constantly, noting every shadow, every movement, every sound. Her rifle rested within reach, a silent reminder of what had become necessary. Soldiers whispered among themselves, some nervous, some impressed by her presence. Didn't seek admiration, but she understood that her role inspired confidence. Her calm, measured determination had become a symbol of hope. Hours into the mission, noticed signs of an enemy presence. Tracks in the dirt, overturned rocks, and faint glints of metal indicated that the area was being watched. Her pulse quickened, but she remained composed. She knew that hesitation could be deadly. She instructed the convoy to maintain formation, keeping the wounded and supplies centralized and protected. Each movement was deliberate, each decision a calculation balancing risk and safety. Had become a strategist, integrating her instincts as a fighter with her compassion as a healer. Then, without warning, gunfire erupted. Enemy combatants emerged from hidden positions, firing from both flanks. Chaos erupted as soldiers dove for cover, medics scrambled to protect the wounded, and the convoy jolted under the impact of bullets. Heart surged, but her mind was clear. She grabbed the rifle and fired in precise bursts, suppressing enemy movement while simultaneously maneuvering the ambulance to shield the wounded. Every shot was a mix of necessity and instinct. She had become the line between survival and disaster once again. Private Daniels, now more composed and capable, moved alongside her, returning fire and assisting with the defense of the convoy. His voice rang out over the chaos. "Keep moving. Cover the wounded. We protect each other." Her command was not born of authority but of experience, of necessity. Soldiers followed, their fear tempered by her example. Had become the anchor in a storm, the force that turned panic into coordinated action. she realized that courage could inspire, not just individually but collectively. The battle raged for hours, dust and smoke blending with the cries of the injured and the crack of gunfire. His body ached, exhaustion gnawed at her limbs, yet she could not falter. Each second required vigilance, each decision carried weight. She guided the convoy through narrow passes, fired at advancing enemies, and ensured that the wounded were stabilized as best she could. Her ambulance had become both shield and strategic point, a moving fortress navigating a battlefield of shifting threats. Amid the chaos, observed the enemy faltering. Her relentless defense, combined with the courage of the soldiers she inspired, had created a fragile upper hand. She continued to fire, to maneuver, and to guide, knowing that any lapse could spell disaster. The duality of her role, medic and fighter, was no longer a choice but an identity. She had learned to balance the necessity of combat with the imperative of life-saving care, and in that balance she found strength. Hours passed, and the convoy finally reached a relatively secure position. Her arms burned, her body trembled, and her uniform was shredded in places, yet the wounded were alive, the convoy intact. Soldiers gathered around, some wounded, some shaken, all alive thanks to her guidance. Lowered her rifle, her chest heaving, and allowed herself a brief moment to acknowledge the enormity of what they had survived. This was not merely survival. It was proof of resilience, courage, and the power of decisive action under pressure. Lieutenant approached once more, eyes scanning the exhausted convoy. "Without you, half of these people wouldn't have made it," he said solemnly, shook her head, fatigue and humility mingling. "I did what had to be done. We all did," she replied. But even as she spoke, she felt the truth settle in her chest. She had evolved. She had faced fear, chaos, and death, and she had not only survived but had guided others through it. Her identity as a protector had. As the convoy settled for the night, sat near the ambulance, reflecting on the day's events. Her mind replayed the ambush, the gunfire, the moments of pure instinct, and the decisions that had saved lives. She realized that she had fully embraced her dual identity, the healer who saves with care and the fighter who defends with precision. This balance was no longer uncomfortable. It was a truth she accepted, a part of who she had become. Courage was now inseparable from her compassion, and together they made her unstoppable. That night under the stars, wrote brief notes about the mission, recording injuries, supplies, and observations. Her hands trembled, but her resolve was unwavering. She had faced death and emerged stronger, not just physically but emotionally and spiritually. She had discovered a depth of courage she never knew existed, and she had learned that heroism was not about glory. It was about action, responsibility, and protecting life in the face of impossible odds. Once a simple ambulance driver and medic, had become a symbol of resilience and hope. She had learned to fight, to protect, and to lead when circumstances demanded it. The next mission, whatever it might bring, would test her again. But she was ready, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Her dual identity as healer and fighter was now inseparable, a reflection of the courage that had carried her through ambushes, battles, and chaos. As the night settled over the base, allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She knew that the battlefield had changed her irrevocably. She could not unsee what she had seen, what she had heard, or unfeel the weight of responsibility she had carried. But she had survived, she had protected, and she had embraced a courage she never imagined she possessed. In the stillness, she vowed to continue standing between danger and the lives she was entrusted to save. The next day would bring new challenges, new dangers, and new opportunities to act decisively. Was no longer just a medic or ambulance driver. She was a protector, a fighter, and a guardian of life. And she knew that whatever the future held, she would meet it head-on, armed not only with weapons and training, but with an unyielding determination and a heart forged in courage. The morning sun rose over the base, casting golden light across the desert sands and rugged cliffs. Stood at the edge of the compound, her uniform still worn and marked from the previous missions, her rifle resting lightly at her side. The air was tense, electric with the knowledge that another convoy mission awaited them, one even more dangerous than the last. Intelligence reports had confirmed that enemy forces had fortified positions along the route, preparing an ambush with lethal precision. His heart tightened, not with fear, but with focus. She climbed into the ambulance, the vehicle that had carried her through chaos and battle, and settled behind the wheel. Around her, soldiers loaded supplies, medics checked stretchers, and the wounded, stable enough to travel, were secured for transport. Hands gripped the steering wheel with quiet determination. This mission was no longer simply about survival. It was about demonstrating the full extent of the courage, skill, and leadership she had cultivated. She was no longer reacting to circumstance. She was shaping it. The convoy moved out, the hum of engines filling the desert silence. Eyes scanned constantly, noting every shadow, every movement, every potential threat. Her rifle rested within reach, a reminder of her dual identity as healer and fighter. Soldiers glanced at her, some with awe, some with nervous anticipation. They had come to rely on her not just as a medic or driver, but as the anchor in chaos, the one capable of decisive action when everything hung in the balance. Understood this responsibility fully. Hours into the mission, the ambush came. Enemy forces had dug into high ground and narrow passes, rifles and heavy weapons aimed with deadly accuracy. The convoy jolted under the initial volley of bullets, soldiers screaming, medics shouting instructions, and the wounded crying out in fear. Hands tightened on the wheel and rifle simultaneously, a fusion of instinct, experience, and determination guiding her every movement. She was no longer simply a participant. She was the linchpin holding the entire operation together. Her first shots were precise, aimed to suppress enemy fire while creating a path for the convoy to advance. Each action was deliberate, moving the ambulance to shield the wounded, coordinating soldiers to flank enemy positions, and ensuring medics could reach those in need. His voice rang out, steady, authoritative, yet calm. "Stay low, cover each other, keep moving." Soldiers responded, inspired by her example, their fear tempered by her courage. She had become a symbol of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. The battle raged for hours. Dust, smoke, and gunfire created a haze in which life and death danced unpredictably. His body ached, her arms trembled from exhaustion, yet she continued undeterred. She ducked and fired, rolled the ambulance into strategic positions, and guided the wounded to safety. Each decision carried life-or-death weight. She had become both shield and strategist, healer and fighter, a force whose presence turned panic into coordinated action. At a critical moment, a young soldier was pinned behind rocks, exposed to enemy fire. Didn't hesitate. She maneuvered the ambulance to provide cover and sprinted across open ground, rifle in hand, reaching the soldier and pulling him to safety. The enemy fired relentlessly, but instincts and determination kept her moving, precise, and unstoppable. She had fully embraced her dual identity, protector and combatant, guided by compassion as much as skill. The convoy finally reached a strategic ridge, providing a temporary safe zone. Assessed the situation, directing soldiers to secure positions and medics to tend to the wounded. The enemy, disoriented by her relentless defense and tactical maneuvers, began to retreat. His leadership had turned the tide once again. She allowed herself a brief moment to exhale, realizing that her courage had not only saved lives but had inspired those around her to act with determination and precision. Lieutenant approached, exhaustion and admiration evident in his expression. "Your actions today, there are no words," he said, shook her head, lowering her rifle, still alert. "Words aren't necessary," she replied quietly. "We did what we had to, that's all." But even as she spoke, she knew the truth. She had become more than a medic or ambulance driver. She had become a force of resilience, courage, and protection. Her legacy would be measured not in accolades but in the lives she had preserved. As the convoy finally moved to secure terrain, the medics began tending to the wounded. Assisted, offering steady hands and instructions. Every movement was deliberate, a continuation of her dual role. She had faced fear, chaos, and death countless times, yet each encounter reinforced her strength and resolve. She understood that heroism was not about recognition. It was about action, responsibility, and the unwavering commitment to protect life when all else seemed uncertain. That night the convoy established a temporary camp, sat alone near the ambulance, rifle at her side, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. Memories of the ambushes, the battles, the screams, and the lives she had saved and lost played in her mind. She realized that courage was not an abstract concept. It was tangible, practical, and often uncomfortable. She had discovered a depth within herself that could neither be taught nor predicted, only tested by circumstance. Soldiers passed by, nodding in respect, whispering her name, allowed herself a quiet acknowledgement not for pride, but as recognition of the bond she shared with those she had protected. Her courage had become inseparable from her compassion, her actions a testament to the power of determination and resilience. She had faced chaos and emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than she had ever imagined. As the stars glimmered over the desert horizon, reflected on her transformation, she had been thrust into circumstances that demanded both skill and heart, both action and compassion. She had become a protector, a fighter, and a healer, a unique combination forged in the crucible of conflict. Her identity had shifted irrevocably, and she accepted it fully. Understood that she could never unsee the battles she had fought, but she could honor the lives she had saved by continuing to act with courage and resolve. The following morning rose with quiet determination. The base was alive with activity, yet she felt a calm focus that only came from experience and self-awareness. She had faced fear, chaos, and death, and she had emerged resilient and unbroken. The ambulance, once merely a vehicle, was now a symbol of hope, a testament to her courage and resourcefulness. This journey had taught her that true heroism lay not in glory or recognition, but in action, in responsibility, and in the unwavering commitment to protect life. In the days that followed, continued to serve, balancing her dual roles with precision and compassion. She trained soldiers in survival tactics, mentored medics in emergency procedures, and remained a pillar of courage and guidance. Her legacy began to grow, not in stories or reports, but in the lives she had touched, the soldiers she had protected, and the inspiration she provided to those who witnessed her resolve. Once a simple ambulance driver and medic, had become a symbol of resilience, courage, and hope. She had faced death, chaos, and fear, and emerged stronger, wiser, and capable of inspiring others to do the same. The battlefield had transformed her, revealing a depth of courage she had never known, and a strength forged in necessity and compassion. And as looked toward the horizon, knowing that more challenges would inevitably come, she understood the truth that would guide her forever. Courage was not a choice, it was a responsibility. Action was the measure of heroism, and compassion the measure of true strength. She had embraced both, and in doing so she had become more than she ever imagined possible, a healer, a fighter, a protector, and a force of unyielding hope. The legacy of would endure, not because of accolades or recognition, but because of lives saved, courage demonstrated, and the unbreakable spirit she embodied. She had proven that even in the face of unimaginable chaos, one person could stand as a shield, a guiding force, and a beacon of hope. And in that truth, found peace, purpose, and the quiet knowledge that she had risen to meet every challenge with bravery, heart, and unwavering resolve.